Masechta Chagiga. I just want to make a quick point. So, like all of the previous Masechtas, the Masechta ends on a very short little daf, which is good for us, because I'd like to finish that a day early, and then maybe use the last day, which would be Chav Zayin, right, which would normally be a full day of a daf. I'd like to use that day to do a Hakdama for Yavamis. So that way, when we get to the first day of Yavamis, we already have a Hakdama before. And we also have to think about if we're going to be using this Sefer that you picked up. You picked it up already? You had the, we made a change in which diagram.
Yeah, he has it aside. I'm getting it.
Just make sure, confirm, because, yeah. Okay.
It's a hard Masechta, right?
No, it's a wonderfully easy Masechta. It's just that it requires focus. So,
It's a problem right there.
Yeah, it's not hard.
No Masechta is harder than another. They're all.
Okay, Mr. IQ.
You did Erevin, you can do anything.
They're all part of one
Mr.
fabric.
Axford.
No, the rabbi said it on Monday night. They're all part of one fabric. I called it Mikana Echad.
Oh,
There you go.
Listen.
Paying attention.
Yeah.
So I just want to say one other thing, just very quick. So the picture books that we're going to use. So it's not complicated. It's just a question. It's like learning like a little system. Just what does the picture mean when this says like this, when this looks like that? With this arrow, what does that mean? What does this line mean? Right. So I think I don't know if we'll have time to it, but I would like to either make it part of the Hakdama to go through a little bit some examples of the book just to see it, or perhaps in a separate night session or something, maybe we'll do something 25 minutes or something like that, just to go through a couple of examples, just to get a sense that when you look at the picture, you don't have to spend 10 minutes. All right, we could try it in the morning.
You get 20 people coming back.
Yeah, no, I hear. Okay, but I also want, there's two, Hakdama to Yavamis, some Masechtas like Chagiga, you talk about Re'iyah and Chagiga, but to fit it in the time, it's not going
I
to be.
come at night. I come at night for it.
I might make.
I come at night also.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's how many is it? It's 6, 7 of us, whatever it is. We'll figure it out. Okay, but either way, says the Gemara. We're learning.
What page? I'm sorry.
We are in 22. I'm guessing 22A. 22A1 is my guess, but I'm not 100% sure.
Street too.
Okay, guys.
I think so.
Ladies, have a
Big
good
year,
day.
got it.
Have a good day.
We were.
Go for the show.
Okay, so yesterday I'm just going to quickly review. Coming off of, we were discussing the first din in the Mishnah. Remember, the Mishnah had said there are certain things that are more holy by Hegdish that we're not as makbid on by Truma. We made a whole list, 10, 11 things, depending upon two opinions in the Gemara. And there was a machlokas between Reb Eilah and Rava about what the reason was for the first case. What was the first case in the Mishnah? If I'm taking one kli and I stick it inside of another kli, have a great day. One kli besoch another kli. So what's the halacha? I'm just going to move this. The light. Okay. So one kli besoch kli. So if I take one kli and I put it inside of another kli, what's the issue? And now I'm going to take that and I'm going to drop it in a mikvah. So Rav Eilah said the concern is that the weight of the interior kli is going to be too much, and then it's going to create a separation where the water won't be able to get in between the two kalim, and that'll create a chatzitza. Remember what a chatzitza was? A chatzitza was where? A separation, so that each individual kli won't be completely submersed at one time underwater, and the mikvah won't work for it. Now let me just remind everyone, no one is saying that this is not called a good tefillah. What we're saying is that midrabanan they said that for hegdish it won't work, but for truma it will, and we'll get to that in a minute. And the understanding is because it looks a lot like a chatzitza. Meaning, really, it's not a chatzitza. The general rule is the water is going to get to it. But since it looks a lot like scenarios where there might be a problem of chatzitza, therefore the rabbi said, you know what, we're going to make it usher. That's the opinion of Reb Eilah. So again, Reb Eilah holds it's because of chatzitza. Kli besoch kli, and kli inside a kli is because of chatzitza. Rava said no. Chatzitza is already covered in the Mishnah. He says the water is going to get to it. People aren't going to make a mistake and think that this is going to be a problem of chatzitza, and they won't think that in general chatzitza is okay. Rather, what's the reason why one kli besoch another kli? Why is that a problem? He says the reason is because of a gzeira. What's the gzeira? Because in here, let's move slowly because there's a lot of steps. Right? Let's clarify. Rav Rava said as follows: if I have a kli, right? Well, let's start from a bigger place. If I have a mikvah, and one mikvah is next to the other mikvah, and in each mikvah it only has 30 saw. Now we know the shiur for a kosher mikvah is 40 saw. So if I want to connect the 30 saw here and the 30 saw here to connect the two, so that now instead of two separate 30 saw mikvahs, I have one 60 saw mikvah, I can do that. Now, how do I do it? I punch a hole right through the wall. Now I have a hole connecting two sides. How big does that hole need to be in order to say it's connected.
The sheet.
So that is called a shifayferes hanod. A shifayferes hanod is just the funnel or the cap of a bottle. Really, the type of bottle they used to use, these leather pouches, whatever it is. And the Gemara tells us the exact amount is it has to be wide enough that you could put 2 fingers in the hole and turn it around inside. You need to have enough room for that. So you got to figure it's about, I don't know, 2 inches or so, 1.5 inches wide, and you have to be able to move inside. If the hole that connects the 2 mikvahs are that wide, then we view each mikvah as connected. And it's really not 2 mikvahs, it's 1 big mikvah. You can be tovel on either side, whatever you want to be tovel in there, and it'll work. That isn't generally true for Hilchas Mikvos. We're borrowing that idea to say that if I take a vessel, if I take a kli, and I put it inside of another kli, well now, the example we used before was if I drop a needle inside, we used in a case of a decanter. A decanter has that sort of bottle-like shape, and it narrows all the way at the top. Now that top hole, let's say it's going to be either more or less than this amount of kishvayferes, and I'd like 2 fingers. So if it's bigger than 2 fingers, we view the water that's in the rest of the mikvah that has entered into that kli as a continuation of the mikvah, and the mikvah inside the kli is also a mikvah. So whatever kli is inside that kli is also getting the tahara from the mikvah. Whereas if the opening of the top of that kli is so narrow that all the water gets in, halachically we don't call that big enough to extend the mikvah inside, then that tiny little kli that's inside that bottle is not getting the full power of the mikvah. All it's doing is getting whatever capacity that kli can hold. So you might be a liter. It's certainly not 40 saw, and therefore it's not going to work. That is true me'ikar hadin. Me'ikar hadin min haTorah, whether it's for chulin, truma, doesn't make a difference. For tfilas kalim, you need to make sure that if I'm putting a kli inside the mikvah, that it is not surrounded on its own inside another kli that has an opening that's smaller than this shifayferes hanod, that's the 2 fingers breadth. So now, Rava says, why does our Mishnah say that even when it's not that small, even when it is big, why is it usher? Typical gzeira. Gzeira of this to that. This looks a lot like that. It's a case of mistaken identity. A person who doesn't know too much is going to look at this rabbi over here taking a kli, putting it in another kli, and must say, oh, I guess kli b'sof kli is okay. And he's not going to make the distinction between how big the opening is. If it's 2 inches, it's 1 inch, it's 1 inch, it's 1.5 inches. He's not going to understand the difference, and he's going to start doing that. And that's going to lead to him thinking his kalim are tahar when they're really tameh, and that's going to lead to problems in different areas. Now, that gzeira, both in Rava because of the wide opening as a concern for the narrow opening, or the shita of Rav Eila that it's a question of a chatzitza, both of them are din d'Rabbanan, and both of them, according to the Mishnah, only apply to Hagdish, but not to Truma. Right? And as we'll get to it a little bit later in the Gemara is going to ask why. We'll get to that as we get to it. But before we get there, says the Gemara, okay, wonderful. We have this beautiful machlekes, Rav Eila and Rava. L'may nafkamina. Meaning, ask the Gemara. We're going to see in a second. The Gemara is bothered. Okay, very nice. The Mishnah says this way. No, they're both explaining shot in the Mishnah.
Yeah.
The Mishnah says it doesn't apply to Truma. What's an afkamina? Meaning, the Mishnah says kli is aser. So Truma is going to be okay, and Hagdish is going to be aser. We'll figure out in a minute why that is. We'll get to that in the Gemara. But before we even get there, very nice, wonderful machlekes. It's very gishmak. Okay, give me a case where their argument matters. If you can't find me a case where it matters, then it's just academic. Nothing wrong with academic, but it's not going to help us in halacha. So let's find a case. The Gemara is about to ask the question. I'm just going to point out, just to think about it. If you think just for a moment, if the whole concern is chatzitza, then if I asked you about which kalim are we discussing, you would say both, meaning both of them are vulnerable to the issue of chatzitza, because the chatzitza would go for both of them. But if the whole concern is just that the interior kli is inside something that disconnects it from the mikvah on the outside, really the whole concern is the real scenario is for the kli on the inside. So there could be a big nafkamina about maybe, what I'm mentioning, Tosfos at. Tosfos mentions, what do you mean, ask the Gemara, my beinai? The obvious, their arguments go in 2 different directions, so it's relevant a little bit later in the Gemara. I just want to point out just something to think about, that it's not just simply there's no difference. In fact, there's many differences. Tosfos mentions one, Rishona mentioned others, but the point is, ask the Gemara, I need to find a distinction between the two, because otherwise it's just a machlokes with nothing wrong with academic machlokes, but we like to try to find halachic consequences to their discussion. So says the Gemara, 1, 2, 3, 6 lines from the top. My ikabein Rava l'derabela. What is really the difference between the two in halacha? Says the Gemara, ikabeinayu salve gargusni shemilon kalim. So here, Rabbi Yaakov was mentioning. So a sal is a basket. Gargusni is also a type of basket. I'm going to define this the way the Tosfos Rid uses it defines it. It helps to, I think of it this way. We're talking here about a basket. Think of it like a wicker basket, but a tightly woven wicker
But
basket.
it's closed at the top, unlike the baskets
So,
we use.
so the Tosfos Rid does not learn like that.
Oh,
So
okay.
if there's another mahalach through the Gemara, then that might help. Because there's a completely different opinion through this Gemara that I want to steer clear of. Not because it's not halacha, it's brought in halacha, but it makes it a lot more complicated to read the Gemara. I think for our sake, it'll be helpful to maybe use a different shita. It's a liberty we have in Daf Yomi that maybe we didn't have in Yeshiva, but I'm going to choose to go that way. So that's why specifically I'm choosing the Tosfos Rid. So the Tosfos Rid, he understands that we're talking about an open kli on top. And really the question here is this salvik argusni, it's a large kli, it's a big kli. Think of it like it's woven, the way we would think of like a wicker basket is probably the best way to think about it. And water can seep through the sides, but the holes on the side are not large like a shikif shvayferes hanait. So we wouldn't view the water coming in this way as like it's connected to the mikvah that's on the outside. So the only way the quote unquote mikvah can get inside the kli is over the top. Okay, so far so good.
Yeah.
So this salvik gargusni shemilon kalim, you filled it with a couple of pots and pans, a couple of dishes, whatever it is, and now you want to go be toivel it into the mikvah. Says the Gemara, this is the nafkamina. If I took these kalim inside another kli, v'hit bilon, and I put them in the mikvah, this would be the classic case where there would be a distinction between the two of them. Again, we're trying to find a case that is kli b'soch kli, one kli inside of another one, where one of their reasons will apply and the other reason will not apply. Says the Gemara, Lamanda mishum chatzitza, meaning Rebbe Ela, who said our Mishnah's whole entire argument for it being a problem by Hegdish is because of a chatzitza or it's doma to chatzitza, ika. You still have a chatzitza, you have one kli with kalim on the inside. If the weight of those kalim are heavy enough that one might think that it can come to look like a chatzitza, so this is still going to be a problem. So therefore, according to the sheet of Rebbe Ela, this case would also fit in the Mishnah and would also be still be tamei for hektish. Says the Gemara, Lamanda Amra, again, this is Rava, Lamanda Amra mishum gzeira shema yitbol machten mitzinoirios. It's a mouthful, yeah. According to the opinion of Rava, that the whole concern is wide opening as a concern for a narrow opening. Well, here, this wide opening isn't just a wide opening; it's the type of clear. And here's the Tosfos Rid's punchline, which is maybe different than what he might bring there or what others might speak out. He understands that this is such a unique type of kli that it has no narrowing at all at the top, and so therefore there really isn't a concern about confusion. Confusion only exists if I see two things that are very similar. One's wider, one's narrower. That's going to be something that in a person's mind, they're not going to know, well, is that 2 inches? Is that 3 inches? Is it 4 inches? We're just going to say, you know what, kli b'soch kli is a problem. But if to begin with, the exterior kli is built in such a way where it has absolutely no narrowing, try to think like a big soup pot. There's zero narrowing at the top of the kli. No one is going to think that if I put kalim inside of a soup pot and dunk that in the mikvah, that I can't stick a decanter in the mikvah. Why? Because the two kalim are so different in their structure that one will make that mistake.
He's trying to explain why we don't say low plug like we
Yes.
normally would.
Yes. What I'm trying to say is that there's a cheshbon in the Rishonim that they speak out over here that we typically, when we make a din derabanan, even when the reason doesn't apply completely, we generally say, well, once the rabbi's made a din derabanan, it applies across the board. But that's only when you're talking about like min b'min, when it's one kind meeting a similar kind. Yeah. But if you're talking about two completely separate things, meaning we don't just say all kalim, right? Kalim, for instance, clothing is not included. We're going to make a distinction between this type of kli and other types. And so therefore this type of kli, because it has completely upright vertical sides and there's zero narrowing at the top, no one's going to make a mistake. So therefore, like Rebbe Ela, it's still going to be usher, because again, there's a chatzitza concern. And like Rava, it's not going to be usher, because this won't be something that someone can confuse. Now, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but it's important for us to keep track as we're going through. Remember, the machlekes of Rav Ela and Rava is whether it's a chatzitza or it's a confusion question, and I'm going to continue to use those words for the ease of use as we go through. Confusion is Rava, and mechitza. Chatzitza is Rav Ela. So chatzitza and confusion, right? So
the inner one, like when you say.
that's helpful. Yeah. So this is a good example. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So here. So let's say I want to get this kli kosher, right?
Yeah.
And it's tamei, right? So the problem is at the bottom of the kli, it's touching the bottom of the interior of that kli, so I have a chatzitza problem.
Yeah.
Now I don't actually have a chatzitza because the water will make it float a little bit. But Rav Ela says the opinion who holds chatzitza, that this looks a lot like a scenario where when you do have a chatzitza, it's a problem. So therefore, even being told this whole thing in the mikvah won't help.
Right.
Whereas Rava is going to say that in the Mishnah this will work, right? In the Mishnah this will be a problem because he'll say this looks a lot like when you have a small kli on top like this. That when I use this is a problem. If the hole here on top is too small, then this won't work, right? But what if I have a kli like this, which completely is upright? I'm not going to mistake that for a kli that closes on the top.
Right.
The two things are two different things entirely, so I won't make that confusion happen. The only time that's a concern is if I have, let's say, try to imagine a vase. A vase comes up to the top, but it doesn't close completely. It gives you a lot of room on the top, but it is narrowing as it gets to the top. That's a lot like a decanter. I mean, honestly, when my wife buys a pitcher, sometimes I can't tell if it's a pitcher or if it's a vase. It's very easy to make that confusion.
It's a little puzzling how they put things in. I guess needles you could put in.
Well, that's sort of the point by the type of thing we're discussing is it gets so close to the top of the point where the example they had to use was these tiny little forks in the needle.
Yeah.
So we have confusion, that's Rava. We have chatzitza, that is Rav Eila. Says the Gemara, what's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is a case where we won't make a scenario of confusion, but it'll still be a problem.
And I just want to add, we use our mikvah differently. We drop it into the basket, so it's in the water.
Not necessarily.
You're talking.
Supposed to do.
You're talking.
That's what you're supposed to do. Most of us, I'm saying what my mommy taught me to do. You take each cup and drop it from your hand so it goes a few inches in the water. So it's not touching the basket. I mean, it saves time to just pile high the basket and put it in, but that's not what we do.
That's
what
I do.
Yeah.
You drop each thing individually, so there
No,
won't be.
I take the basket
Okay.
and I put the.
So we'll talk later, but that's not the best way to do it.
No, it's not.
That's not the best way.
That's what he showed in the video.
Yeah.
Drop it.
Drop each one one by one, so it gets
You have to
in the
do it.
water.
For other reasons, though, you have to be careful when you drop it.
Well,
because
the
you have to-
mikvah gets full of stuff that people.
No.
love.
I mean,
Yeah.
what I was mentioning yesterday, which is, if you're talking about a vessel that has a kli kibul, you have to be careful for pockets of air. When you just drop something in, you have to make sure water gets to the whole thing.
Fill it first, put it under,
Yes.
turn it, fill it, and then
drop it. Yeah.
Can I send that clip to the Yomi?
Which clip are you talking about?
Rabbi Eli's about this.
Yeah, sure.
Michael, because it's competition with you.
I don't consider him competition, and not in the way that people mean when they say that. I mean, I consider him like a teammate. I
But I
don't.
just want to say he shouldn't be. I'm assuming he's not criticizing all the mikvahs that we have because they each have a rav who paskin that it's
Of
okay.
course, yeah.
So he shouldn't, as a daf yomi person, say. And there's a
He's
big
not saying it.
criticism.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm making sure.
yeah. And let's
You got the
remember.
one by the cleaners over here on West Broadway? You got that one?
I usually go to the one on Peninsula near
Near
Mill
the school.
Road. Yeah, and if you go to the back and there's a Kayla mikvah.
Okay, let's stay on point here. This is a tough
Okay.
Gemara today. These tangents, while helpful, really are not. So let's try to
There
stay.
is no competition for this.
Okay. Let's keep it. Let's keep
No
it straight.
competition.
Okay. So what are we saying? We're saying there's a machlekes between Rav Eila and Rava. The machlekes between Rav Eila and Rava is whether it's
Chatzitza
What's that?
Beruzin, we
Is there
got
a
it.
psak halacha between that? I would assume Rava, but is there a psak
yeah,
halacha?
there is, but it's more complicated than that. It's more complicated because depending upon how you learn the Gemara, plus we're going to see in a moment that kli b'soch kli may only be an issue when the basket doesn't need to become tahor, right? The basket they leave in the mikvah. So that's maybe a question of kli b'soch kli, but the basket wouldn't be a problem anyways because the baskets are typically not closing
It's
on
hard
top.
to get a psak halacha when no one has the same shot in the sugya.
Yeah.
But you have to start with deciding do we pass them like Rava or like
Yeah.
Rav Eila.
No, I think the halacha is like Rava, but I'm just saying I don't know
Where
what that
goes.
actually means. Yeah. Okay. Says the Gemara. I don't want to say I don't. It doesn't matter, but yeah. Okay.
It doesn't matter that much.
Yeah. Not for
These are all chumras that we don't necessarily.
And not to mention this is like grabbing the elephant's tail and thinking you have the elephant. The conversation's a lot bigger. Okay. Says the Gemara. Okay, so we have a machlekes between Rava and Rav Eila, and the Gemara says it's nafkamina. What's this nafkamina? The basket. This basket that it goes straight up on the sides and it has the ability to take water in through the walls. So we said, according to the Mandarmer that holds chatzitza, again, the sheet of Rav Eila, that's going to be a problem still. And according to the Mandarmer, mishum gzera, shemayat machtem v'tzinaris b'klishay b'piv kishafeferes anod, then we'll say the following: salve gargusni, this basket, she'ein b'fi and kishafeferes anod, that does not have a concern at all for it even narrowing down to a concern for shafeferes anod, it's not going to be a concern, not going to be a problem. So therefore,
the rid reads ein b'fihem.
it's just a
almost the
statement.
opposite.
Yeah. It's a statement about
so big
the
that
concern.
it's not-
Exactly. Yeah, it's
not
not
the
completely in the lashon.
Not
Yeah.
the pasuk.
No, not the pasuk. but I think it's a little bit easier to explain it. Okay, says the Gemara Weiter. This opinion of Rava, who would say that in this scenario it's going to be mutter, shouldn't say mutter, it's going to be not a concern for Tumah, it's going to be a good tefillah. V'az the Rava latame, the Amar Rava, and here it's just before in the word, salve gargusni shemila and kalim, v'hit bilam tahorin. Now, once we're mentioning salve gargusni, Rava says, let me tell you another halacha in this statement. What's that other halacha? Mikveh, if I had a mikveh, shechilku b'salve gargusni, that I split with a basket like this. And again, remember the way we're understanding it is the water can penetrate through the walls, but the holes that the walls of this kli have are not large enough, like a shifaferes hanoid, that you would consider it like a tzinar, like a pipe connecting everything. Hatovel sham also like tvila. If a person jumps in the mikvah on one side, let's say, imagine you have a big mikvah, like
40.
let's say I have a 40 saw mikvah, even a 50, 60 saw mikvah, whatever it is, and I split the basket right down the middle, wall to wall, right? The basket goes wall to wall, so there's no flow of water. The only way the water gets from one side to the other is through the basket, and it will get through the basket, but in more of like a porous way. It'll more be through like I'm sure it'll go through the holes, but it won't be like a pipe. Yeah, it'll be like deep and deep.
Flowing smoothly.
Like
Right.
seepage.
Yeah, seepage. Seepage is exactly what it is. Yeah. So now the Gemara says Rava, this same kli will basically be a chatzitza, not so much between us and the mikvah, but between one side of the mikvah to the other side of the mikvah. So says the Gemara, he'll say, and I'll prove to you that the logic makes sense. If I have two mikvahs, one right next to each other in the ground, we don't connect the two. Why not? Why don't we say that since water travels through the soil, and it does, obviously, otherwise trees wouldn't exist and grass wouldn't exist. Why don't we just say the water's connected? And the answer is because the holes are too small. So therefore, he says, and since this mikvah doesn't have 40 saw in one spot, it's not going to work. Rashi here points out, they make diukim in this Rashi. It's hard to say if it's a good diuk or not, but many achronim talk about it. Rashi over here uses a lashon of novin, the hamayim hanovim. Novea is typically the language we would use for a ma'ayan, not for a mikvah. And if you remember when we first started learning this sugya, we made a distinction that the requirement for mem saw is only when you're talking about a mikvah of make shamim, rainwater, not from the water of a spring. We'll leave that discussion for an eon conversation, but for our sake in the Gemara, we're going to understand it's talking about a mikvah of rainwater, and it's collecting in two pits. The pits are separated by dirt, and Rav is just pointing out that the same way those two mikvahs, if they don't have 40 saw, are not kosher, so too if you stick a basket inside a mikvah like this, it's going to separate it out. And the point again is, it's not really so much for this halacha, but it's being brought in the statement of Rava to support the idea that Rava would agree that chavis b'soch chavis, kli b'soch kli, is only going to be a problem for a hegdish, right? When it's a case where you actually have a concern of confusion. But if the case you're talking about, really no one's going to confuse because the nature of the kli is so distinct that it's not going to be confused for something else, then there's no concern. Okay. Says the Gemara Weiter. Now, we've just explained the machlekes between Rav Eila and Rava, but everyone's maskim that the halacha is that the actual shefayferes hanait halacha, the halacha of taking one kli, sticking it inside of another kli, that second kli, the bigger kli, if the opening is smaller than a shefayferes hanait, that is not going to work. Not only will that not work for hegdish or truma, that won't work for anything. Meaning that is not a good tefillah at all. That is a major problem that we don't view the water on the outside traveling to the inside of the kli, and therefore the little needle that's inside of it's not going to become tahor, not going to become tahor for anything, right? And the whole concern in our Mishnah is, do we make a gzeira when it's not so small, according to Rava, and according to Abaye for a different reason because of chatzitza. But hakol modim, that if I have a scenario where I'm sticking it inside a kli that the top of the kli is too small, not sure if that would work, but okay, fine. Yeah, I mean, it accomplishes small. I just don't want the visuals have to be perfect, because if the visuals don't work, it confuses. And I just rather not attempt to try to use it, if you don't mind. Plus, I don't want to keep you from drinking your beautiful coffee. Okay.
Plus the video won't catch it.
Yeah, that's true. So 1 second. So just again, so what are we saying? We're saying that everyone agrees that actually putting a small kli inside of a bigger kli, when that bigger kli's opening is too narrow, that tefillah is not a good tefillah. Now the Gemara is about to throw a curveball. The honey mili, this is true, that when a small kli goes in a bigger kli where the opening is too small, that it's a problem only when the kli tahor, when the outside kli is already tahor, meaning not in need of a tahara. It's not tameh, it's tahor. Since it's tahor, it going into the mikveh is only serving one purpose, to transport the kli that's inside of it. it in and of itself does not need to be in the mikvah. Therefore, we view it as a chatzitza, meaning then we view as it separates the water of the mikvah from the outside, and to view that what's inside this kli is not called mikvah, but rather it's separated off from the mikvah, and therefore that's when we say the interior kli is not going to get a tahara. However, aval b'kli tama, if the external kli, let's say in my example, the decanter that has the narrow opening, if we're going to say that kli is tamei also, so both kalim are tamei. So now I have a kli like a decanter with a needle inside of it, that they're both tamei. Don't show the picture just yet, yeah. And I dunk the entire thing in the mikvah. Says the Gemara the following interesting lumdish svar. Migu
It's
desalkit.
only going to
No. According to Rashi, it's going according to both. Because really, we're just discussing the actual halacha. The actual halacha of the sticking the needle inside the decanter. Everyone agrees that if you put that into the mikvah, that's going to be a problem. Not just for hegdish, for truma, for other things. Other Rishonim say this question is only going in Rava. But yeah, I think the simpler way to read it is it's going in everyone. And Rashi basically is, Tosas complicates matters a little bit, but so what's the argument here? Says the Gemara, Migu desalke tvila lekula gufa demana. Since the tvila works for the external kli, salke lehunami lekelim deizbei. It's going to also work for the kelim that are inside of it. Sounds like a little bit of an illogical svara, meaning mimanov shach, right? Mimanov shach, meaning which one is it? Meaning either it's going to work and we consider the size of the opening relevant to keep the water from the outside connected to the inside, or it doesn't. So it seems the way this works is, and again, migu is a concept in halacha in general. It doesn't only apply here. Migu is a general rule, but it applies in different ways in different places where literally the word just means since or because. Migu, since X, so then Y. Here what it's going to mean is, it almost sounds as if the external kli, if it doesn't require a tahara, then like I was saying before, what's the purpose for it in the mikvah? It's just a transportation device. It's just helping to get the interior kli into the mikvah. Well, if that's the case, then it doesn't belong there. It's like a separate piece that disconnects the outside water from the inside water. And what's that called? That's called only if you have it smaller than a shafeferes hanai. But if it in and of itself requires a mikvah, because it's tameh, it needs the mikvah, it belongs there. If it belongs there, then the water that's going on the inside is needed for it in order to be metaher it. In order to be metaher it, it has to touch every piece of the inside of that kli. Well, then, even if the opening is smaller than a shafeferes hanod, we're certainly going. Let's ask it this way: let's say I didn't have the kli inside, if I take the first kli and I dunk it in the mikvah, and water fills it up, of course it's going to work. No one's going to say that the interior of that that kli is not a mikvah. Mm-hmm. So it's kolzman. I need that kli for a tahara. Then the inside of the kli is a mikvah for the smaller kli that's inside of it. But if it in and of itself doesn't require a tahara, then all it really is just like a separate container inside the mikvah.
That it would work?
Why wouldn't it work?
Because it's not connected.
How are you ever going to be told such a kli?
You can't. Let's say it's less than a shred node. Why can't you argue that it was not connected?
Because we see that they did tovel such kelim.
I know, but it's not because if it's not.
That's connected. Just for hush. That's just to connect the mikvah.
I know, but you could. I understand what you're saying. I'm saying for argument's sake, if it doesn't work.
Yeah, you're right. I'm working under the assumption that you can be tovel the kelim. Yeah, enochanam. Okay, so the Gemara. So that's the svara of the Gemara. Now the Gemara is going to bring a mishnah to support that idea. Says the Gemara Ditnan.
You're saying this also goes to the other side, chatzitza.
Yeah. Meaning because chatzitza, because Rava and Rabbeila were done. Meaning we've discussed them. Their whole concern is a derabanan,
right? Out
of a concern for some other scenario. But everyone's maskim to this halacha. It seems. I mean, I would say it like that.
Okay.
Now it is possible that that's not true, but I don't want to go down that road. I mean, there's a way to there's a Tosas over here that I think is very helpful, but it's complicated and it takes some time to go through. Okay, so says the Gemara, what's the raya? The Mishnah, not our Mishnah, different Mishnah. The Tanat says like this. The Mishnah I think is in Kalim. The Mishnah says mikvos. Okay. Kalim shemilan kalim v'hitbilan. This sounds like mamish a case of kli b'self kli. It says over here harei elu tahirin, and it's mashma that no distinction between how big or small the opening is, even if it's super narrow, even if it's less than a kishafeferes hanoid. So even if it's less than a kishafeferes hanoid, we're going to say that it's tahor. And says the Mishnah Vayter v'imlo tavel, but if you didn't stick it in the mikvah, then we say mayim hamuravim achi yu muravim kishfaferes hanod. Then shfaferes hanod becomes relevant. Very strange Mishnah over here. The Mishnah, you're reading it, it's very megumgam. It's like, it seems like there's missing commas or there's missing context. So what is it saying? It says the Gemara, my Kamar. It says like this. In the Seifa is really the problem. The Reisha is okay. The Reisha is saying that Kalim Shemil and Kalim V'Itmilim, Kli B'Soch Kli, Hare Elu Tayretz. You see Kli B'Soch Kli is mutter. And then it says in the Seifa, however, if you didn't stick it in the mikveh, then it doesn't work. So what does it mean? V'im lo tabal hachikamer. V'im eino tzarech lahatbilo. So the Reisha is talking about where you need to, and when you need to, then it works. And the Seif is talking about where you don't need to because the outside kli is already tahor. Then we'll say umayim hamurav machu murav mikshvaferes anayid that it's not going to work, and therefore even the interior kli is going to be tummy. But okay, either way.
It's so paradoxical. Like you're better off just being matame
Yes.
the outside one first.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I remember, I just want to just mention briefly. Remember before I asked my ika bein zel lezeh, I said, "What do you mean? I have an example. What about the external kli? What if I take two kalim that are the outside kli is tahar and the inside kli is tameh? The nafkamina is going to be they're both tameh. The nafkamina is going to be, will it work for both or not? I'm talking now about Rava and Rebela. According to Rebela, that the concern is chatzitza. Well, let's just think. If I take the interior kli and I put it inside another kli, and the reason why the Mishnah doesn't work is because chatzitza, then l'chora there really shouldn't make a difference. Meaning whether they're both tahor, they're both tameh, should always not work.
It's
Right?
still the same amount of
Chatzitza is a chatzitza, right? So it becomes a little bit more of a difficulty there, but okay. So let's hold off on that thought. Says the Gemara.
Does anyone learn Chagiga Be'iyah?
Yes,
Someone?
yeah. No, so, yeah. No, absolutely. It's just. I think it's placed in the wrong spot. It's like right before Yavamis. It's finishing off Masech the Seder Mayed. People want to, at least from a Daf Yomi perspective. Okay. So we were learning in this machlekes on Miraim. It turns out the Gemara says I have a brisa to say that it could be this brisa is really the same machlekes. Again, whether the concern is chatzitza or the concern is a gzera of A and B. What's the case? The case of salva gargusni, the nafkamina we brought earlier. It says the brisa, salva gargusni, this big basket that has the holes, the woven basket, shemilan kalim v'hidbilan, you filled it with kalim, stuck it in the mikvah, mamish the case of our Mishnah of kli b'sof kli, and this is the nafkamina. So it says the Tanakama holds bein l'kodesh, bein l'truma, meaning we don't say that truma is going to be a problem. Tahorin, it sounds like Rava.
We don't say Kodesh.
Yeah, exactly. Truma for sure is not a problem, but even kodesh, it's going to be a good tefillah, and that's going to be like the shita of Rava who says that salva gargusni is too distinct. It's not going to be a confusion problem, so therefore it's going to be tahar even for hegdish. Whereas Abba Shol, he says no. Oimer letruma, yeah, no problem. Aval lekodesh, it's not going to be good. Aval lekodesh, why? Alamai must be because he holds like the svara of Rebela that it's a chatzitza problem, and we're only geyser by hegdish and not by truma. Now we haven't explained why are we geyser by hegdish and not by truma. Says the Gemara. Okay, whichever way you go, Rava, Rebela, the Dinda Rabbanan, I've been explaining it as a confusion versus a chatzitza issue, but really it's a confusion versus a confusion. I just didn't want to confuse, right? Meaning the concern was chatzitza, which it's not, but I might think if this is going to be a problem and it looks like a chatzitza, then maybe all chatzitza is not a problem. Whereas Rava says, if I say this type of kli b'soch kli is going to be a problem, is going to be mutter, I might think cases of kli b'soch kli that aren't good are going to be okay, meaning they're both confusion related. All the Rabbanans are. In this sense. So says the Gemara, whichever way you go, whether you're going with Rava's understanding that it's about the size of the opening, or it's going like Reb Ela that the concern is the confusion about a real chatzitza, says the Gemara, why are we only making the gzeira by hagdish? Yihachi, truma nami, say it also by truma. Meaning again, let's remind ourselves, the Mishnah. The Mishnah says 11 distinctions between kodesh and truma, and we're saying that this type of tevila, one kli inside of another kli, is not going to work for hagdish, but it will work for truma. Clearly, it's a derabanan svara because how can you splice it and cut that, split that hair? Says the Gemara, whatever argument works for hagdish, to say that we shouldn't do it, the confusion that exists there will exist by truma as well. Says the Gemara, no, what do you mean? Leman kamrinan, who is this entire halacha spoken to? We're talking about tumah v'tara. Tumah v'tara are only spoken to what we refer to as chaveirim. Chaveirim meaning to say, and not an ama'aretz. An ama'aretz is someone, as the rabbi and anyone who's learning Mishnah Yomi knows, an ama'aretz at a minimum is ignorant of halacha. Since he's ignorant of halacha and generally speaking, he's not makbid on tumah v'tara.
We could change.
Yeah, right? But Tumah v'Tahara, since he's not makbid in Tumah v'Tahara, he's not asking these questions. He doesn't understand the difference between this and that. So therefore, this entire sugya of kli b'soch kli is spoken for who? It's spoken for the chaveirim. Well, they know enough to say that that's called a chatzitza and that's not a chatzitza. Or they know that's less than a shveiferes hanayid and that's bigger than a shveiferes hanayid. right? So says the Gemara, that's why we don't make the Gzeira by Truma. What's the obvious question? So then, what, all of a sudden, this halacha is not speaking to the Chaverim for Hegdish. Also says the Gemara, Chaverim made the Yadi, says the Gemara, Ihachi Kodesh Nami. The Gemara says, no, you're right. Really, this has nothing to do with the Chaverim. We're going to come off of that. Really, the concern is the Amaretz. One second. I thought we don't make Gzeiras for an Amaretz, and we don't. We don't make a Gzeira to cover an Amaretz who himself is anyways not makbid. We're only making Gzeiras for people who want to be makbid. If you're anyways got your own, go to Eshet Torah, you'll figure out how you have to learn a little bit, you have to get a little starker, whatever it is. But if you're holding by not keeping the halachas, or you don't care about Tumah V'Tara, we're not making Gzeiras for these people. We're making Gzeiras for the people that matter. So says the Gemara, it's not for the Amaratzim. It's not for the Amaratzim. So then what? Chazilei Amaretz, the Ozil Matbil, right? He's going to go ahead and do what? Let's work this out slowly. He's going to take this kli and go kli b'soch kli. He's going to see the Talmud Chacham who's doing it. He's going to conclude, oh, this must be a good tefillah, and therefore he's going to do it himself. And therefore the truma that he's going to end up having, that he's going to hand to the kohen, is going to be what? It's going to be tameh, right? And so what we're saying is that we're only concerned about that by hegdesh, but not by truma. Ask the Gemara, why not? Truma nami chazilei amaretz v'azal mat. But what's the difference about whether the amaretz is bringing some sort of his hegdesh to the Beis Hamikdash, or he's bringing truma to a kohen? In both scenarios, the kohen's either eating truma, or we're somehow involved with hegdesh that's becoming tameh, which is a problem. So the Gemara says, no, there's a difference. Lo mekablin and minayim. When he comes to bring when he comes to bring the truma, we don't accept the truma from him.
Never?
We'll see in a second. No. Yes, we do, but no. Meaning the truma that is brought to the Beis Hamikdash, to the kohanim that are the kohanim chaverim, we'll get to this in a minute, we don't accept the truma. And therefore, what's the concern? The concern is that he's going to eat tameh. He's anyways eating tameh. So that's not the gzeira. The gzeira is to help us. We need to make sure that the kohanim that are chaverim are not accidentally being handed truma that's tameh, and they're going to eat truma that's tameh.
The Amaretz with Truma. You said that.
We do trust the Amaretz with truma. We do trust the Amaretz with truma, but we don't to taking truma off.
Take truma off.
Yeah, we're talking here about Tumah V'Tara, which is a different thing. Tumah V'Tara, we don't trust them. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, no. Okay, so now let's understand.
It's so complicated. They didn't know properly how to handle Tumah V'Tara. It wasn't that they were so evil. It's very complicated.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest, these are not easy Gemaras, right? So, okay, so let's just follow the cheshbon over here. So what are we saying? We're trying to figure out why was it that the Din D'Rabbanan was not said by Truma, but it was said by Hegdish when it comes to a Kli B'soch Kli. Meaning, Kli B'soch Kli Me'ikar Din is okay. It's a good Tvila. We did not want Amaratzim to see it and accidentally confuse it for other scenarios where it really is a problem. So therefore we made a Gzeira. But why did we limit that Gzeira to Hegdish? Says the Gemara, because the Amaratzim will see it by Hegdish, and if we allow them to do this, they'll come to themselves, make the Hegdish Tameh. How? By putting it in one of their kalim that they think is tahor, but really it's Tameh. They're going to follow whatever the rabbis did. They see the rabbi going Kli B'soch Kli, they'll go Kli B'soch Kli, and therefore the Hegdish is going to become Tameh. So Truma is also going to become Tameh. So what are we saying? We're saying that no, that there's a distinction, that when the Truma ends up coming to the Kohen, we're not going to accept it. So therefore there's no concern. We don't have to make the Gzeira to begin with. It says the Gemara, Im Kain, Kodesh Nami Lo Nekabel Minayu. So then just don't make the Gzeira at all, even by Hegdish, because we'll just say the same thing. We won't accept their Hegdish. Says the Gemara, that we can't do. Havule Eva. If we don't accept their Hegdish, that's going to create Eva. It's going to be antagonizing them. It's going to create resentment. It's going to lead them to do terrible things, Averas. They may come to fight with us, in Aschinam, Chulu, all of the terrible things that come because of Eva, whether it's between a husband and a wife, father and son, between the Goyim and the Yidden, and here between Amaratzim and Chaverim, there's going to be Eva, there's going to be hatred. We try to not have sin aschin, especially in the Beis Hamikdash. I mean, obviously, it goes without saying. And so, therefore, when it comes to Kachim, ask the Gemara 1 second, Truma Nami, Havile Eva. If we don't accept their Truma, which you just said 2 seconds ago we don't do, then that's also Eva. Like, what's the difference? So you'll take my Hegdish, but you won't take my Truma? What, am I not a good enough Jew for you? I mean, that's really how the Rabbeinu Chanal speaks it out. Says the Gemara, he's not as concerned that someone's not accepting his Truma in the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because to be a Kayan, it's a blood thing. You can be an Amaretz and a Kayan. To work in the Beis Hamikdash is a kind of different story. You have to be a chaver. You can't work in the Beis Hamikdash as an Amaretz. So if he comes to the Beis Hamikdash, and again, we're only concerned for Chaverim, we're not concerned for Amaratzim. So if he's bringing Hegdish to the Beis Hamikdash, the Hegdish we're going to accept. Because of Ava, we have to accept it. Since we're accepting, we need to make sure it's tar. In order to make sure it's tar, we need to make sure that the kalim that he's using are tar, which means we don't want him to accidentally use a kli in the wrong way, which again means that he's not dipping one kli inside of another kli in a way that he thinks is tar, but really is tameh. So therefore, we have to go out of our way to make sure that when we dip, we don't dip kli b'soch kli. But that's only a concern because we're accepting hegdish. But by truma, where we have no problem letting him give it to the kayin, and therefore we can tell him when he comes to the doors of the Beis Hamikdash, sorry, no truma from an amaretz, no concern for us. So who cares if we go ahead and dip one kli b'soch kli for truma? There are two questions over here that I don't have good answers to. I'm just going to say them. One, I think, is asked by the Beis Yitzchak or the Siach Yitzchak. I forget his name. He says, I don't understand. This Amaretz, who doesn't know his shoelaces from his, right? He doesn't understand the difference over here. He's going to be able to make the distinction between when I dip one kli b'soch kli for hegdish versus truma. I mean, hegdish and truma is not something you see. It's a status conferred upon an item. The kli on the outside does not say hegdish and truma. So
he knows what's going to the Beis Hamikdash, and they have stricter procedures. He says, "In my house, we eat vegetarian food that comes." But I know
but you have to understand something. When he's going to the Beis Hamikdash, unless you're going to make a very balabatish kimta.
Truma is local. Truma is not the Beis Hamikdash.
No, but the concern by truma specifically is we want to make everyone go kli b'soch kli, so that when he brings truma to the Beis Hamikdash, that's the specific point. Meaning the concern isn't so that when he gives it to his kohen, his friend. We're not making it for the kohen, his friend. The kohen, his friend, we're not making zayras for. It's the concern for.
In the Havamina, we were.
In the Havamina, fine.
Trying to figure out.
Yeah, in economic. True.
But at the end, the distinction is what's a national institution and what's local stuff.
Could be. Okay. Maybe that'll be an answer to this question. The other point that I just want to make over here is the Gemara ends by saying, no, we're going to mipnei Ava. We're not going to take the. We're not going to push away someone bringing hegdish, but for truma, we will.
We're not worried about.
We're not worried about offending him because he has another place to stick it. Okay, 1 second. So the Gemara is saying mipnei Ava, we're going to accept. Says the Gemara, but why can't he go give the hegdish to his kohen who's an amaretz?
Hegdish is done in the Beis Hamikdash, meaning it's.
But people amaratzim eat hegdish. I mean, hegdish is hegdish.
They eat it, but they do it at the Beis Hamikdash. I think that's the distinction. It's like we have a national institution called the Beis Hamikdash. You can't exclude one part. I mean, today we do, but they knew.
Yeah, but hegdish doesn't have to be eaten in the Beis Hamikdash. It could be in Yerushalayim.
Hegdish is a korban.
Yeah, but we're talking about eating it.
But hegdish always has a nexus to the Beis Hamikdash.
Okay, but it's in Yerushalayim. I mean, it could be. You could be talking about an amaretz over there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I'm not saying I disagree with you're right. The question doesn't exist once you make the assumption that there's a national versus a.
That's my read.
Yeah. So this question, Rav Eliyahu Gutmacher, the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, asked this question, and he's not asking it like as a bomb kasha. He's just trying to clarify what is the hegdish we're discussing, and this is an important factor. What is the actual hegdish we're discussing?
We don't understand the social arrangements that well. Like, actually, what did they do? How did they?
True. But I think but I do think there's a question here that needs to be clarified. What is the hegdish?
Right.
What type of hegdish are we talking about? Is it kache kache? It can't be kache kache. Because again, we're talking about a scenario where the hegdish is being touched by an amaretz. What's that hegdish?
So it's shlamim that he eats.
Oh, so it's a shlamim that he eats. So what's the concern? Who's he giving it to? Which part of this goes back to a kohen? Which part goes into the Beis Hamikdash?
The chaz of Ashok.
Chaz of Ashok. Okay, so it's the chaz of Ashok. The kohen takes the chaz of Ashok when he does the shchita. The amaretz is never getting his hand on the chaz of Ashok. It's an important factor. It's an important factor. Trust me. The next time through the cycle, you're going to want to listen to this year. You're going to want to trust me. So it's Eliyahu Gutmacher. He says that from the Maskana of the Gemara, you see it's very clear. We're talking about the shemen, and we're talking about the yayin for nesachim and the shemen for a mincha, and therefore that's ochel and mashkin. Because again, you can't be matame an animal that's walking. It can't be the animal that you take into the Beis Hamikdash. You can't be matame an animal. Okay, we'll go right, but it's
Interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation.
I'm
Okay.
saying the reason we have so much trouble with this type of thing, these questions, is that we can't picture it. We're not like watching the
True,
movie.
fair enough.
We missed the Charlton Heston movie. And we
On
don't
Tomb of
know-
Atara?
Yeah.
Yeah, no joke. That'll be the next thing we do. Maybe we'll start a production company to put out real,
And even
halachically
Chazal,
accurate kosher movies.
even Chazal, when they were talking about Kutchim, it was several
Yeah,
generations.
hundreds of
They
years
were,
even,
They were
yeah.
hypothetically talking about stuff that they didn't see.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. Okay. So the Gemara says, okay. So what did we just get finished saying? Let's just again. I want to bring us back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah says Kli b'sel Kli is a problem. There was a machlokes, but in the end of the day, we said that the machlokes, whichever way you go, is only explaining hegdish, not truma. Why not truma? What we're effectively saying is that it's really this is a very Talmudic type of thing, where we're saying is the whole reason why it's usher is out of confusion for an Amaretz, but not out of the concern for the Amaretz. The concern is for the Chaver and for us. How is it going to come to us as a problem? Well, if the Amaretz thinks that this type of tefillah is kosher, he'll do it even when it's not, and we'll end up having hegdish coming into the Beis Hamikdash that's tamei, and we can't push away his hegdish because we don't want to anger him. Whereas truma, we're not as concerned for because we'll always be able to say to him, when he walks up to the Beis Hamikdash with his truma, sorry, we don't accept your truma, and he won't get angry at that. Why? Because he can always just bring his truma to his buddy who's an Amaretz. That is effectively what the Gemara is saying at this point. So really, the reason why in the Mishnah we're not going to accept the tefillah by hegdish isn't because hegdish is so holy. It's specifically because we won't tell an Amaretz we won't accept your hegdish, but we will tell him we won't accept your truma. That's effectively the distinction. Says the Gemara, before we go weiter, who is the Tana who actually holds of this argument of Ava, that we're going to adjust how we behave, either accepting or not accepting hegdish or something, because of to prevent there being some level of antagonization or resentment of the Amaretz or in general Ava. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya, the Brisa says, I'm Rabbi Yossi. Why is it that all Amaratzim for hegdish are believed when they bring their wine and their oil? Why are they believed?
That's where he got the Einstein.
Yeah, that's why is it believed that that's going to be tahar? Kol Yemos Hashana, exactly for the reason in order to prevent these Amaratzim who are going to come to the Beis Hamikdash with their oil that's they think is tahar, and we're going to tell them we think it's tummy, so we have to accept it. So therefore, since we have to accept it, because if we didn't accept it, what are they going to do? They're going to say, "Oh, you don't accept my kachim, you don't accept my hegdish. You know what? I'm going to build an altar in my backyard, and I'll start doing it back there." Which there was a time in history when that was okay. But nowadays, not nowadays, unfortunately, but in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, a person, well, nowadays too, you're not supposed to be building altars in your backyards. The Sorif Para Adumalatzma, or he takes it even further. He'll start saying, you know what, you're not accepting me for Hegdish. Then if I become Tamei Mace, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and make Para Adum in my backyard. And instead of sending him to the loony bin, people are going to start going to his house. They're going to start doing kachim in his backyard. He'll be like Beis Hamikdash Shlishi, and it's going to be a major problem. So therefore, Mipnei Ha'eva, Rabbi Yossi says that we accept their Hegdish and they're trusted. Fine. Now it's important to understand over here, Ava is never going to be an argument that's going to be matir adin daraisa. This entire concept of not trusting, if we know for sure that it's tamei, we don't accept it. It's more that we don't know if it's tamei or not. Let's say it's a suffix, it's a doubt, because we don't know if the Amarotz is makbid or not. At best, the whole Masechta Demai, which you guys are learning now, is built on an idea that it's a suffix. We don't know. Did they or didn't they? Do they know it? Do they not know it? Did they do it? Did they not do it? So it's the same thing over here. We're talking about a din derabanan to begin with. And when you're talking about a derabanan, the question is, did the rabbi say it's us or not? Well, if it's a question of Ava, the rabbi said when it's an Ava problem, you're going to go ahead and let it go. It's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, whereas it's not the opinion of the Rabbanan when it comes to the following Allah. Says the Gemara, Amar Papa, not only are we talking about Ava, that it's Rabbi Yossi, once the Gemara says that, let's ask who the opinion of Ava is in a different context. Kaman mekablino on idna sadusa me'amaretz. Let's say an Amaretz comes and says Edis. Do we accept Edis from an Amaretz? Again, ignorance in halacha and trust is two separate things, but it seems that an Amaretz can't be trusted. If he can't be trusted, he can't be trusted. Says the Gemara, we accept him. Not because we think he's very reliable, or not because he's 100% exactly who we want to be making Edis, but rather, Kaman ki Rabbi Yossi. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi holds that we're choshesh for Ava, and we don't want Amaratzim to come to Ada. They're going to come say Ada, so we're not going to accept them because we're going to say, yes, sorry, you're an Amaretz, we don't trust you. And again, I don't exactly know what the concern is there. They're not going to go bring carbonos up in the base of English, but you'll come up with a scenario, whatever it is.
You know, they'll make their own conservative shul.
There we go.
It's like in our
They'll
shul,
make their own
we
system.
said we're only giving aliyahs to people that are Tamil Chachamim, and there will be shuls that do things like
Yeah,
that. The other people will just go and make their own shuls.
fair
you know?
enough.
It's not a good thing.
Okay, let's get back to the topic at hand, which is Kalim have a dipping one kli b'soch kli. And we said that the whole reason in the Mishnah why it only applies to Hegdish, not to Truma, is because by Truma, the concern isn't there because we're always just going to push their Truma away. We're not going to accept it. So therefore, there's no concern. Ask the Gemara, fine, but we're going to borrow their Kalim. And don't we have to be concerned that their Kali might be Tameh? Ask the Gemara, V'nechesh l'she'ila. She'ila means to borrow. Maybe we'll be concerned for borrowing. And here the Gemara is about to go through a very long tangent to make one point. The point is, you see, we borrow Kalim from an Amaretz. Okay, so that's the part I want you to hold on for dear life. Hold on for the railing of the side of the boat as we go through the storm. And I promise you at the end, the question is going to just simply be, you see, we borrow. So what we're going to say outside, I'll say it outside so that when we read it through, it'll go faster. Because we're going to see a machlekes beishama beisolo. Machlekes beishama beisolo has what to do with the following halacha. Normally, the halacha is if you have a dead body in a house, in a room, that tumah floats through the whole house. If let's say there's a hole in the roof, or the ceiling here, and it goes, then it goes to the second floor. Now, if I close it up, then it's not going to go through. Right? So it depends if there's a hole there or not. We'll use that case. Right? Let's say I have, or another example is, okay, let's say it this way.
Well,
Now,
sideways also?
sideways, up, down, everything.
If you're standing underneath the hole, then you're not.
Well, that's a different discussion. But what we're talking about here is, let's say this room here, there's a dead body, God forbid, on the floor, and there's a hole through, and there's a second floor. Let's say I have kalim up on the second floor, I have food on the second floor. Even though the dead body's down here, the hole in the roof goes all the way up. Now, also true on this floor, if let's say I have a pot on the floor, and the pot becomes tameh. Now, what if it's a kli cheres, a pottery? What if it's a earthenware type of vessel? So earthenware vessel, when it comes to tumah and tara, has a very unique status. The rule generally is that it only becomes tameh when something gets inside it. Which means that if, let's say, you were to seal up a piece of pottery, so it's completely sealed up, you can't get to the inside of the kli. Interestingly enough, it's like a force field against tumah. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like you could put something inside of it, even if it's inside an ohel, and there's a dead body in there, the tumah from the body won't get to whatever's inside the cheres. Okay, so far so good. Also true, if I take a piece of cheres, this piece of earthenware, and I seal up the patch, the hole in the roof, before the person dies, that tumah from the body won't go to the second floor for the same exact reason, because what you have is the outside of this kli cheres it's repelling, so to speak, the tumah from going through. So that means if I have tumah on the second floor, if I have a kli on the top floor, it won't become tummy.
That's a force field.
Force field idea, yeah.
I call it an N95 mask.
There we go. Well, at N95, it will only do 95%.
Oh,
this is an N100.
And it wasn't force field when they had a thing, something on.
Yeah, if you want to go off tangent of a tangent, this tangent is taking us too far. Okay, so again, we have a kli cheres, an earthenware kli, that has this force field that prevents tumah from getting inside of it, whether it's keeping it from going to the next floor, or it's keeping it from getting inside the kli. Now, that means if, let's say, I'm very nervous I know someone's I have a crisis in the house, he's on his way out. Mm-hmm. I don't want all the stuff in my house to get all tameh. I'm going to go shove it into my kli cheres, seal it up. It's like a safe. Nothing can get to it. Yeah? Okay. So now, let's say inside I have this big kli cheres. Let's say I wanted to keep all my pots and pans good. So I took my metal pot and pan and I shoved it inside. So now, after they take the body out, there's no tumah on my metal thing. When I open up my kli cheres, I can get my pot and I can go use it. I don't have to go bring it to the mikveh. Okay. So now, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are going to have an argument about what exactly inside that kli, or for that matter, what on the second floor, because they're both really the same case, what in those scenarios is tameh and what is tahor. Meaning, the way I just explained it, nothing should be tameh. Everything should be tahor, and that's actually the opinion of Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel is going to say everything's completely tahor. Beis Shammai is going to pick and choose. He's going to say some things are tameh and some things are tahor. Beis Hillel is going to say, Beis Shammai, make up your mind. Either agree with me or go the other way fully. But it can't be. You can't dance into chasanas. You can't. What is it? Doing the clean versions of it, but you can't sit on a fence. Yeah. So
That's like the N95 mask. It protects you when you're eating when
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
there, but
For
there
any
you
mask,
don't need
yeah.
it.
While you're chewing or
Right.
playing music, all of a sudden it's so that's going to be Beis Hillel's question, and we're going to have a long conversation with exactly what Beis Shammai's argument for supporting it was, and that's going to be predicated on the following idea. The general assumption we're going to be having here is, then this is why it's relevant a little bit for our conversation, is what we're talking about here is where the Kli Cheres was touched by an Am Haaretz. Now, you might say, who cares? A Kli Cheres does not become tummy if you touch the outside of it, and the truth is you're right. Before it was sealed up, or before it was placed in the hole, an Am Haaretz got to the part that can be Makabel Tummy, which means the Kli Cheres is tummy. Now, there's another rule. If you have a Kli, any Kli that's tummy, that Kli cannot be Chotzetz. So this whole beautiful idea of the force field only works if the actual Kli is Tahar. But if the Kli becomes Tameh, then it doesn't work, right? So now, if the Kli is Tahar, then Beis Hillel's argument makes perfect sense. If the Kli is Tameh, then really everything on the inside should be Tameh. So they're both a little bit have to answer for this. So the explanation is like we just said 2 seconds ago. The Tumah of the Kli, when an Am Haaretz touches it, is really only a Tumah Miderabana. Why? Because we don't know for sure that he's Tameh. It's that we don't know if the Am Haaretz is Tameh. So Midirabanan, we treat everything he touches as if it's Tameh. But the Tumah is only Midirabanan. So that means Mina Torah, it is Chotzetz. Midirabanan, it's not. That's how it works. So Beis Hillel says, Midirabanan, if it's going to be a problem, right? So then it should go all the way through. Beis Hillel says, we ignore the Tumah Dirabanan. We don't make a Gzeira, even though we say the Kli itself is Tameh, but at Chatzitza it's going to work. So Beis Hillel says everything on the inside of the Kli and everything upstairs is going to be Tar. Beis Shammai is going to say, well, once to begin with, it's only Dirabanan going to be accessing what's inside the Kli or what's up. I can pick and choose which stuff I want to do. And the Gemara actually says in Idios that Beis Hillel eventually agreed to Beis Shammai. This is why it's in Idios. It's one of the cases that. Yeah. So, well, I wouldn't even say we passed like both of them. Beis Hillel came to agree with Beis Shammai in this case, like the original statement of Beis Shammai. Now, the Gemara is going to, this is not an easy one. No.
This is easier than this.
Much easier.
That's what I meant to say.
If you think this is not easy, Yavamas is significantly easier, much more accessible.
This is.
These are ideas that we're not familiar with, so it's a little bit
I
challenging.
gotta go pick up my people, my friends.
Have a great day.
Honk, honk. Wheels on the bus go round and round, baby. Yeah. Okay.
Sadik.
No joke. Okay, so this dialogue between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel goes back and forth. In that dialogue, Beis Shammai says to Beis Hillel, I don't understand you, Beis Hillel. You're going to be matir kalim inside? According to you, you're going to allow the kalim on the inside to become tar? What about if that Am Haaretz takes that kli and lends it to you? And that's the whole reason why we need the story of this brisa. Because in the brisa, you see, or Mishnah, you see a conversation where no one argues. Mm-hmm. Yes, we borrow kalim from an Am Haaretz. And if we borrow kalim from an Haaretz, let's bring it back to our Gemara for a second, then okay, fine, you got rid of the issue of the truma itself. We're never going to accept their truma, but we will borrow their kalim. And if you're going to go dip a kli b'soch kli, which is going to make them think that's okay, then they might think it's okay even when it's going to create a tumah in the interior kli, and you'll borrow that kli. And if you borrow that kli, the kli is going to be tameh, not tahor, and that's a problem. The Gemara is going to say, you're right. The answer is, we'll see in a second. Not in a second, as we read through the Gemara, the answer is going to be, yeah, you're right. When we borrow kalim from an Am Haaretz, we're tavel them first. Simple. So really, the Gemara is asked, let's be nechish l'sheila, let's be concerned for when you're borrowing. The Gemara says, yeah, when I borrow it, I'm going to be tavel it. In between what I just said, the Gemara brings a very long raya. But okay, let's read it inside. Says the Gemara, v'nechish l'sheila, that's not. Gemara says, and I'll prove to you that we actually borrow kalim from an Am Haaretz. Kli cheres, like I just explained, is matzil al hakol. It protects everything. It has a force field. Says the Gemara, divrei Beis Hillel. That's the opinion of Beis Hillel, at least at the outset. Beis Shammai oimrim. Beis Shammai argues and says, no, einoi matzil. It doesn't protect everything. Ella, it only protects what? Al ochlin ve'al mashkim ve'al kli cheres. It protects food, it protects drink, and it protects kli cheres. And I'll just point out, these are the three things that once they become tameh, they have no takana. You have to break a kli cheres, or you have to throw out or burn the food, because you cannot be total food. So, and we'll see in a moment, that's specifically the reason why Beis Shammai says that these are the things that are saved. Because if we were to be matama, these Am Haaretz is going to be like, yeah, you're going to tell me even this I can't keep. He's going to disregard the whole entire halacha. So Amar Lahem Beis Hillel Beis Shammai mipnei ma. Beis Hillel says to Beis Shammai, like we said before, I don't get it. How can you pick and choose over here? He says, what do you mean? Amar Beis Shammai mipnei shehu tamei agav amaret. Since an amaret's touched it, and an amaret's touching it as a tumah derabanan, ve'ein kli tamei chotz. Since it's tamei, a tamei kli does not separate tumah. Therefore, the force field is broken, and therefore things that get inside that are tamei. So Amar Lahem Beis Hillel says, fine, but v'haloti hartem ochlen umashkim shebesocho. So then why are you picking and choosing? Either make everything tamei or make everything tar. Amr Lehem Beis Shammai says back to him, when we were mitahar, we were only mitahar the food and the drink that was inside of it, also the kalim, the klicheres, the other kalim, the klicheres that were inside of it. However, la'atzmo tiharnu, that was only for him, and so therefore, avon nitahar es hakli shetaharaso lechol lo, but we're going to be mitahar the metal kli that's inside. That we won't do, because what's going to do? Meaning, if we're going to be matayr that kli and say that it's tahar even for us, they're going to come take a kli that they think is tahar, bring it to us, we're going to borrow it, we'll think it's tahar, that's a problem. Again, here's the punchline that we need. You see, we borrow kalim. So therefore, it says the Gemara.
But we don't borrow food.
But we don't borrow food, exactly. That's a good point. We don't borrow food, and therefore that's not a concern. Exactly, because you can't take it to a mikvah. We'll say that in a minute. So now, once we're mentioning this machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, Rabbi Yeshua heard this. Tanya Brisa says, "I'm Rabbi Yeshua. Boshni midivreichem Beis Shammai. You, the house of Shammai, I'm embarrassed from you. The idea that you're making this distinction between some things are tahor and some things are tamei, meaning it should all be either tahor like Beis Hillel, or maybe it should all be tamei.
So you're not just wrong; you're ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. And we'll see exactly at the end of the Gemara exactly why that's such a problem. So he says, "Efshar isha lasha be'areva." You're going to tell me a woman, let's say on the second floor in this exact case, with the kli cheres in between, she's kneading dough in her kli. Isha be'areva mitamin shiva. The tumas mace from the body is going to go onto the woman, and it's going to go onto the kli that she's kneading in. But the ubatzek tahor, but the dough is tahor, meaning he's bothered by the hypocrisy of his psak. Why picking some things and not other things? He gives another example. Logan, it's a kli, malay mashkin, it's holding water, or it's holding whatever it's holding. Logan tamei tuma shiva, the kli is going to be a problem. Well, mashkin tahirim, but the mashkin that's inside of it's not going to be a problem. This comes out to be a very hypocritical thing. So nitfuloi talmud echad mi talmidei Beis Shammai. So some of the talmidim of Beis Shammai came to be, to come to speak to him. You have to remember, Rabbi Yeshua was one of the Gedolei Adar. Amar Loi, and he said to him, Omer loch taiman shel Beis Shammai. You want me to tell you the reason for why Beis Shammai said his halacha this? Amar Loi says, yeah, Amar, say the halacha. Amar Loi, so he said back to him, he asked him, Kli tamei chaytzitz or yeina chaytzitz? He asked him, is it true that if you have a Kli tamei, is it chaytzitz or it's yeina chaytzitz? He says, what do you mean? Amar Loi, yeina chaytzitz. We know a Kli tamei is not chaytzitz, like we explained before. Amar said, okay, second step. Kli shel ha'aretz, min tameh or tar? It's a tamei or tar? He says, well, of course, I'm like tummy. It's tummy. So he says, okay, so let's start doing the math over here. He says, if you told him everything's tummy, is he going to listen to you ever again? Meaning to say, again, it's a din derabanan. If you tell him that it's going to be tamei, then even his ochel and mashkin, his kli, cheres, his tamei, is he ever going to listen to you again? Not only that, he might even throw the kli back at you. He's going to get angry at you and tell him, what am I asking these questions for you? You want to know why I'm an amaretz and I'm not mak? Because every time I come to you, tell me things are tamei. Says the Gemara, this is the reason why Beis Shammai picked and chose. He picked those things where he's going to not get an angry response from the amaretz, but he left the ones that matter. Betumasan. So Gemara says, Miyad halach Rabbi Yeshua v'nishtateach al kivrei Beis Shammai. Immediately he realized the reason was so deep and so penetrating that he immediately went up and went over to the kever of Beis Shammai and Amar ne'nesi lechem atzmos Beis Shammai. He says, I've caused you harm. Umas stumos shelachem kach. If these ideas of yours are predicated, they are predicated on such deep and penetrating svaras and logic, and these are the ones that you're not clear. Those things that seem to be obvious and simple, they must have even deeper ideas behind them. Meaning, he came back with respect. Amru, they said, Kol Yamav Hushkaru Shinav Mipnei Taniyosov, that his teeth were black from all of the tightnesses that he did in order to do tshuva over this, that he, was disparaging of Beis Shammai and the Talmidim of Beis Shammai. They bring different girsos here, that it's Hushkaru Shinav, Hushkaru Panav. But the point is that be very careful in being, mechabed Talmidei Chachamim. But either way, this long story was all brought in for that one thing, the Shetahroso Lecha Ulo, that Beis Shammai was arguing to Beis Hillel, that what are we doing here? You're going to be Matahir the Kalim? and we're going to go borrow those kalim, below it's going for you and for him. So the lecha is a problem. So he says, Ketani mias lecha v'loi, meaning not only for him, but even for you. Meaning what? Almost alinan minayu. That's this whole long Gemara just to prove that we actually borrow kalim from an amaretz. In which case, then, very good that you made a gzera by hegdish and not by truma, because by truma there's no concern. We're not going to eat the truma. We're not going to take the truma, but we are going to take the kli. And kli b'soch kli, if it's a problem, then kli b'soch kli is a problem, and that means the kalim that they're handing you might very well be tameh. He says, what do you mean? Kishalin minayu matbilin anlu. Like I said before, we're going to go ahead and be tevel. Ask the Gemara 1 second. If that's an answer, hachi nihadru lahu Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Why did Beis Hillel not respond to Beis Shammai in their dialogue above? When Beis Shammai said, what are you going to do? You're going to be metayer the kli even when you borrow it. Why didn't Beis Hillel just say, what do you mean? I'm just going to be tevel. Kishalin minayu matbilin anlu. Why didn't Beis Hillel just respond with that? And here we make a distinction between tumas meis and regular tuma. Tame meis boy hazor gimel v'zalit. This gimel v'zayin. Since tumas meis requires before you go to the mikvah, it requires hazoya from the mechatas on day 3 and on day 7, which means you need 7 full days before you can even go take it to the mikvah. So if I borrow a kli, a regular kli that maybe the amaretz, wasn't toivel properly, and maybe it has, I don't know, tumas nida on it or whatever it is, I can just take it to the mikvah, chik-chak, I go stop by the mikvah on my way home, and I'm good to go. But I'm going to borrow a kli from an amaretz that it turns out this kli came from a situation where I have to be concerned for tumas meis. Well, what am I going to do? I can't just stop by the mikvah. I got to go to the base of mikdash. I got to get mechatas on day 3. I got to get mechatas on day 7. I'm borrowing a kli for 7 days. Says the Gemara, umana l'zayin yomi loy mushli inshi. That's not something people do, and therefore there's no fix. So therefore, when it comes to tumas meis, ein chanami Beis Hillel had no response to Beis Shammai. But when it comes to regular tumas, the kalim aren't going to be a problem. You could always take it to the mikvah, and therefore there's no concern al truma, both on the actual truma itself and both on the kli of the truma, and so therefore there's no gzera. Whereas by hegdish, like we said earlier in the Gemara, there the amaretz is going to we have to accept his hegdish, and so therefore the confusion that's going to come means that better just to all across the board low plug kli b'soch kli is going to be usher. Now from this story, from this discussion in the Gemara, what do we see? We see that if the amaretz is to come and say, "Oh, I did it already. I was toivel it," meaning, I was toivel the kli. We don't trust him. Atfila loy mehemni. We don't trust an amaretz when he tells us that he was toivel this kli. I'll prove to you we do. V'hatanya brisa. The brisa says, "Ne'emon amamei aretz al taharas tvilas tamei meis." You see that when they're toivel for tumas meis, and they come and say that I was toivel for tumas meis, we believe him. Amar Abaye loy kasha. The brisa that says that we believe him is talking about Habegufo. It's talking about him himself being a tamei meis. That's a very hecher. That's a very high madrega of tuma that even the amaretz is going to be, concerned for, and therefore we'll trust that he went ahead and dunked. When it's talking about just as kalim, where there isn't as much of a fear or much of a respect for that level of tuma, we don't trust him. That's a bias tarot. So there's a distinction between tumas meis versus, and not even tumas meis, his body versus his kalim. Says the Gemara, Rava Omar, he says a different thing. No, we're not talking about that distinction. Really, we could be talking both by kalim, idi b'kelov. And if it's idi b'kelov, so then how do you explain why we trust him if he's coming to us with a kli that is tamei tumas meis, where there we trust him, whereas a kli that is for any other reason we don't trust him? Gemara says, v'lei kasha, hada amar me'olam lo hitbalti kli b'soch kli. One case is talking about where it's kli b'soch kli, right? So we're basically, what the Gemara is answering over here on a high level is that when the amaretz comes and tells us a generic halacha that he did, we trust him.
Something uncomplicated.
Uncomplicated.
I don't do that.
I was toivel, and I opened up a Shulchan Aruch and I took a look, and all of a sudden he throws out a term, and you're like, where'd you hear that? And you're like, you know what, this guy's an amaretz, I don't trust that. So therefore, we don't rely on it. The Hatanya here's b'nichusa. Ne'eman amaretz leimer peiris loy hochshur. He's believed to say that water never touched it. Aval eino ne'eman leimer peiris hochshur, that water got on it. However, aval loy nitmu, they didn't become tamei. That level of distinction between the complication of it became wet, and then it got dried, and then it got tamei, and that we don't trust him. If he says it never got wet, I left it in my cabinet, it didn't go anywhere, that's one thing. But to say that it all of a sudden he starts opening up, Mesefta Machshira, and he's telling us all the different halachas in the Mishnah, that we don't trust.
It's like the lady that takes care of your kids. Yeah, I get the kids candy and candy, but I
exactly.
always get a hechsher.
I always look for the Hebrew writing. I always look for the Hebrew writing.
Where I get the circle with the C.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. C means certified kosher, right? Okay. So it says the Gemara, and we'll just go to the two dots. We'll hold over there. The agufo mi mehemen, and are you telling me that we'll trust that Amaretz for his body? Meaning now we're going back to Abaye. Abaye said that the chiluk is whether it's going by kelev or by gufay. So you're telling me that on his own body for tumas meis he's believed? Says the Gemara, "V'hatanya brayisa chaver shabo lahazais." You have a chaver, not an amar. It's a person who's trusted for tumah v'tara. He came to the base of English. He needs to get his mechadas because he's tamei meis. We say mazin olav miyad. Immediately we'll go ahead and do the hazah. We don't have to ask. Did you wait 3 days? Right? We know if he's coming, it's 3 days. We trust his 3-day wait. We don't have to be concerned. Amaret shabo lahazais. Ein mazin olav ajiyaz b'faneinu shlishi v'shvi. We have to wait 3 days for him to do. We make him in front of us go 3 days, and then we'll do the hazah, and then after that, the 4 more days, and we'll do the shiva. So what do you see? You see, we don't trust the Amaretz when it comes to Tumas Meis Begufay. So which one is it? Meaning, and again, the obvious distinction here is maybe what there's a distinction between Tvila, was he Toivel, versus do we trust that he waited a couple of days for hazah? The Gemara says, Ela Amar Abaye, he explains, Mito Chomer Shehichmarte Olav Betchilasai. You're right. Once we're makbid on him by the hazah to force him to wait to do it, that sort of like puts the fear of God on him, so to speak, where now he's like, oh, I better really make sure I don't mess up over here. So once we make him and force him, he's like, I don't want to force me to do anything else. I don't want to go through this whole process again. So this time around, he's going to go be makbid. Therefore, he kalta Allah b'sofa. We're makel on him in the end and say, you know what? If he says he was taival, we trust him. Hold over here. The next Gemara really is just the new din in the Mishnah, and it's already a little late.
Interesting subject.
Yeah, it's not just that it's interesting; it's complicated.
Yeah.
And again, Tumah Tara, it's I really wish we had a nice lighter heading into Yevamos. I could use the extra time maybe a little bit to do a little bit more preparation.
Is there a few blot of Agatha? I don't know how the structure
A little
is.
bit maybe at the end. I'm not even sure.